Look around and see what you've got left. Did you get free? I'm giving all of it without regret. 'Cause what's the worst it could be? In need of more than just the check to check to get free. Not trying to get by. Trying to get by. I'm trying to get free. Trying to get free. Not trying to get by. Trying to get by. I'm trying to get free. Trying to get free. I'm trying to get free. I'm trying to get free. I'm trying to get free. Not trying to get by, get by, get by. I'm trying to get free. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm not trying to get by. No. I'm trying to get free. I'm not trying to get by, get by, get by. No, no, no. Ooh. I'm trying to get free.
Good evening, everyone. I'm going to proceed to give instructions for Spanish speakers to hear this event. Buenas noches a todos y bienvenidos. Es un placer tenerlos con nosotros. Para escuchar este evento en español, por favor, llamen al número de teléfono 844-857-5555. Por favor, llamen al número de teléfono 844-857-5555. Una vez que llamen a esta línea y terminen la presentación inicial, pueden marcar el código de acceso. El código de acceso es 811-7900. Voy a repetirlo, código de acceso 811-7900. Al final del código de acceso, por favor, presionen el número o la estrella. Muchas gracias y que disfruten esta noche.
Welcome. To access closed captioning, please click on the icon on the bottom right hand of your Zoom screen that says CC says live transcript. Again, to access closed captioning, please click on the icon on the bottom right hand of your Zoom screen that says CC/live transcript. We also have Spanish and ASL interpretation. Accessibility is a huge part of the work, and we want to make sure that these spaces are accessible for everyone. Welcome. It is so good to kick off this series with you all. Whether this is your first time joining us or you've been rocking with us since the first Survivor Healing series, welcome. We are so honored to be co-creating this brave space with you. As survivors and survivor advocates, we know that the work to end sexual violence is a daily commitment. To continue our vision of disrupting rape culture, we are proud to bring you the second episode of the Survivor Healing series, Disruptors Edition. This space is a weekly gathering for us to come home to ourselves and learn strategies and support us in our healing journey and stepping up as disruptors. My name has been Kayla Haynes, and I'm an organizer and advocate fighting against sexual violence. I came into this space due to personal experience with my childhood and also college. I've been doing this work for the last 8 years, mainly with a focus for HBCU students in K-12 schools in low-income areas. I work with a number of different national organizations fighting against sexual assault, including fighting against legislation that are harmful to survivors of sexual assault, and also working with national and local politicians. And I'm extremely passionate about this work. And when I think about this work and what I do to fight against sexual violence, I always remember my why. And my why is to make sure that another little Black girl does not have the same experiences as me. And if she does, she has the resources and support that she needs. Tonight is an opportunity for us to have real talk. When I say real, I mean open, I mean honest, and I mean transparent. It is our brave space to learn how to disrupt rape culture and show up for the survivors in our lives. to get real about how hard it can be to do so, because this journey is hard, and learn new tools so we can build toward our freedom dreams. Tonight, you might feel inspired and empowered after our discussion. You might also feel anger, fear, guilt, and shame. All of this is accepted here because all of that is valid. These conversations are hard and can open the door to many emotions. You deserve the space to be in your journey, whatever it looks like. If you feel triggered or otherwise feel the need to step away, we encourage you to take care of yourself. Self-care is important. This session will be recorded and available on Me Too's Facebook and YouTube page. When you are ready to come back to it, it will be here. Now, without further ado, I would like to invite Shashina Bray to lead us in a grounding exercise. Shashina is Me Too's Director of Programs and is a mother, therapist, activist, and educator. As we build our understanding and capacity as disruptors each week, we will also share healing practices, tools, and exercises to add to our toolkit. Grounding exercises are important to come back to center and to be in the present. And Shashina is going to lead us through a practice we can access at any time and in any space. Shashina, take it away.
Thank you, Venkayla. Peace, everyone. Thank you for taking this time to be in community with us, and thank you for this moment to ground on purpose. Typically, if you've been a part of groundings, it's often like quiet and we're bringing into stillness. But before we move into stillness, I just want to encourage everybody, because I'm feeling it in my own body, just to shake it out, right? Give yourself a moment to move some of the stagnant energy in your body, move your shoulders, move your elbows, move your neck, whatever it is, move some of that stagnant energy. Yes. Stomp your feet, wave your arms if that's what you need to. And as you're ready, I invite you to bring your body into stillness, to settle back into your seat or your bed or your cushion. I invite you to ground your feet if possible so that you can feel the floor beneath your feet. Try to find a long spine, whether you're laying down or sitting up. I invite you to pull back through your ears so that your head is resting over your shoulders and your shoulders are resting over your center. Last week, we introduced the idea of diaphragmatic breathing, breathing from our diaphragms or breathing from our bellies. So I invite you to go ahead and place one hand on your belly so that we can connect with our diaphragm as we breathe. I invite you to perhaps close your eyes or lower your gaze if that feels comfortable for you. And I invite you to begin to notice your breath. Bring a childlike curiosity to the awareness of your body as you're breathing. Notice how your stomach inflates. Notice how the skin stretches, how it becomes taut. And notice the softening with your exhale as your belly button moves back towards your spine. Can you inhale and fill up in the belly and soften and let something go? Inhale and fill up. Soften and let something go. I encourage you to keep breathing in this way. I'm going to be quiet. And I invite you to notice, how does it feel to breathe? And perhaps as you're noticing the mechanics of your breath, you might also notice sensation in the body. Movement, heat, tension. All of those things are okay because they often carry information. They carry messages that are often connected to our emotional states. And so a way of checking in with the self is to notice the sensations. What might your body be trying to tell you? Get some water. Lie down. Slow down. Let it out. Just take a moment to notice. And when we're done with this practice, I encourage you to give yourself what you need if you notice something that came up. Expanding as you inhale and softening as you exhale. We'll close with 3 breaths together, breathing in through the nose, fill up. Exhale, let it go. Breathing in through the nose and fill up. Exhale, let it go. Breathing in through the nose, fill up. And exhale, let it go. Thank you. You can find this noticing practice in your workbook. If you haven't already, please check out today's questions and reflection from our conversation. If you don't have the workbook, we will be sending it out again, and we'll also be sending out each week's workbook lessons at the end of the series. So please look forward to that. And my last reminder is to remember your breath through this conversation. Samyukta mentioned, or excuse me, Venkela mentioned that there might be various emotions that come up during this time, and that's okay. If you find yourself becoming overwhelmed, I encourage you to come back to your breath. Come back to this place. Thank you.
Thank you for leading us in that practice, Shashina. I hope the grounding exercise helped you all in arriving at this moment. For this series, we want to co-create and hold a brave space together. And that means each of us taking responsibility for the health and well-being of the collective. Our agreements are as follows. 1, respect the space. 2, no judgment zone. Every step you take towards your healing is an act of courage. As our panelists share their wisdom and stories, let us approach the conversation with curiosity and compassion for them, for ourselves and for each other. 3, lean into curiosity. Tonight, the chat box is open for asking questions and being in community with each other. We ask that you connect with each other, affirm what is being said, and seek out resources to support your healing journeys. 4, ask for support. We have expert healing specialists moderating the chat. Please reach out to them if you would like support in finding healing resources in your community. Please leave it to them to answer any concerns or requests for resources that are raised in the chat. They are there so they can focus on being present with the conversation and with one another. For our resources, tonight we encourage you to take care of yourself. If you feel triggered or need to otherwise step away, please do so. I promise we will not get offended. We understand that conversations around sexual violence are extremely hard. So if you need to take a step away from the computer, if you need to turn the volume down, that is perfectly fine. This is your time, this is your space, and we'll make sure we want to respect boundaries. We have a virtual healing room that you find on Facebook posts and in the chat. By clicking on the different images, you will be transported to various resources and activities. Lastly, you can also go to www.MeTooMovement, and movement is spelled MVMT.org to access the Library of Healing Resources. Again, MeTooMovement.org, and movement is spelled MVMT. So it's time for us to get into it. Tonight's conversation is intimate. It centers the experience of Black mother and daughter navigating sexual violence and journeying through healing. When family is the site of violence, what does one do? What are the rape culture dynamics that are unique to Black families? And what is the responsibility of the larger Black community to disrupt sexual violence within Black households? Through our courageous conversations between mother and daughter, we will explore what disruption and healing can look like within the Black family. Tonight, we are joined by the brilliant Aisha Shahida Simmons, award-winning documentary filmmaker, writer, and activist, producer and director of the 2006 groundbreaking and acclaimed film, No, the Rape documentary, and the editor of the 2020 Landon Literary award-winning anthology, Love with Accountability, Digging Up the Roots of Child Sexual Abuse. And her mother, Dr. Gwendolyn Zoharah Simmons, retired emerita in African American and Religious Studies and affiliated faculty in Women's Studies of the University of Florida. With a long history in civil rights, human rights, and peace work, Dr. Simmons was active with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, better known as SNCC, and spent 7 years working full-time on voter registration and desegregation activities in Mississippi, Georgia, and Alabama during the height of the civil rights movement in the 1960s. Since her years with SNCC, Simmons has served as an organizer with the National Council of Negro Women, serving as their Midwest field director for their Project Woman Power, and later with the African American Friends Service Committee. Welcome Aisha and Dr. Simmons to the Survivor Healing Space.
Thank you. Thank you. Really wonderful to be here.
Thank you.
I just want to thank you all for coming into this space. Thank you for your wisdom that you're about to share with us today. It is always a joy to talk to other Black women who are doing this work in disrupting sexual violence. So with that, we want to jump right into the questions. Aisha, you have been a vocal advocate in the fight to end childhood sexual abuse, especially with the Black community. What has fueled your work?
Well, first, I just want to express gratitude for the opportunity to share this space. Gratitude to Me Too. Mom, can you put you on mute, please? Because you're at that. Thank you. Gratitude for this space. And thank you to Me Too movement for this invitation to have this conversation with my mom. I am a survivor, so that's what brings me to this. I'm a survivor of childhood sexual abuse, and I'm a survivor of adult rape. I came to this work, I didn't start through my childhood sexual abuse. I started through being a survivor of adult rape, which led me to therapy and working with a therapist. In fact, Dr. Clara Whaley Perkins, who was the speaker last week, I worked with her for 27 years. So it was in my work with Dr. Whaley Perkins that I really began to tap into my being an incest survivor. So I always would talk about I would always say I'm a rape survivor and an incest survivor, but I never like really fleshed that out because it was just too close to home, literally and figuratively. But the silence, I would say, just around sexual violence sexual violence in all communities, but looking at the community from which I come from was just so loud, and coming from a very race-centered activist family, I was really thinking about sexual violence and how to break that silence. So I would say that in my 27 years of working on disrupting and ending sexual violence, the work around childhood sexual abuse is newer because I wasn't able to deal with mine. And so as a result, it was hard to even really look at it. But now I'm like head on. I really believe it is foundational to all forms of sexual violence. I believe that if we're going to disrupt and end sexual violence, we have to dig up the roots of childhood sexual abuse.
Yes, I can definitely agree with that. As someone who has had a similar experience, I experienced childhood sexual abuse as well, but I didn't really address the issue or even discuss what sexual assault was until my adult experience. And that kind of introduced me to the work in fighting and advocating for other survivors. And I definitely agree that when it comes to issues such as this, especially in Black communities and Black spaces, people are fairly silent on this issue. There's not really a space that is safe for us to address these issues. For me, it was the Black church where I experienced my sexual assault. And there was not really a space to be open and honest about that. And not to come forward at all, because we know that a lot of times with sexual assault, when it comes to the Black church, they're going to protect abusers before they protect the ones who experience harm. So I definitely relate to what you're saying. Just waiting to getting to adulthood to really understand the impact, and also getting into therapy to work through those issues really helps you understand how what you experience as a child also affects you as an adult.
Definitely. And for me, and I'm sure my mom will weigh in when my parents are divorced, but I was very close to, and they were both involved in my life, coming from just really activist family, and dealing with sexual violence and it not being addressed in terms of what was happening to me was very and this is hindsight speaking, very confusing, right? And it was not my parents, it was my grandfather, and my paternal grandfather, step grandfather, the only one who I knew and loved deeply and dearly, and trying to make sense of all of that, those complexities and contradictions. Yeah.
Absolutely. And speaking on parenting, we understand that there's nothing easy about parenting, and there's nothing easy about navigating sexual violence within your own family. Dr. Simmons, what do you understand now that perhaps you did not understand when Aisha initially came to you?
Well, first of all, thanks so much for inviting me to be a part of this conversation and inviting me into this healing space. Let me just say that I too am a survivor of sexual assault, not childhood. So it began during my college years and into, my years as a civil rights activist. So this issue of sexual assault against women and girls, and I now, understand that it's also against males. But at that point in my life, I just focused on what was happening to women. And in the civil rights work that I was doing as a project director in Laurel, Mississippi, I, developed a program where in the project, if you assaulted a woman, attempted to, you would be put out of the project. And so, I was 20 years old when I did that. And so this has been an issue for me a very long time. At the same time, what happened in my own family and my trying to address my inaction around my daughter's sexual molestation that she's just mentioned by her step grandfather. So, to set the groundwork, I thought that, this was impossible for her grandfather to do. He was the person who brought her and me and her father home from the hospital when she was born. I had always seen him as a loving figure. I now understand that this is all a part of it. But at that point, I was not aware that, this really happens in homes. It had not happened to me. So, but I later learned from many of my friends who are my age that they had suffered through this. And so, it was quite a surprise. But to go back to what happened to Aisha, when she told me that her grandfather was molesting her, I did not believe her. I mean, I said, oh no, he would never do anything like that. It must be a bad dream. I mean, this is not possible. So it really took time for me to believe Aisha, because she, thank goodness, was insistent that she was not having a bad dream. This was absolutely happening to her. And so once I believed her, then what, and as she has mentioned, her father and I were separated, but both were very involved. And we both had these jobs where we traveled a lot. And so Aisha stayed with her grandparents while we were on the road, sometimes for long periods. And, prior to her telling me what her grandfather had done to her and was doing to her, I thought she was in the safest place outside of being in my home. And so, this was a shock So then I tell her dad doesn't believe it, so we've got to convince him. And then it's like, what do you do when you have a situation where her grandmother and she were very, very close, and the grandmother was ill with a long-term illness. And so, her father was saying, we can never tell her because, meaning her grandmother, because it would kill her. So, I just wanted to lay out how sometimes these situations are extremely difficult. And I clearly did not handle it well. Neither did her father. And so while the molestation stopped after 2 years, and I thought it was because her father had spoken to him, but I didn't. I mean, here I was a person, on the front lines of battle in civil rights and women's rights. And the fact that I never spoke to him directly, ever. And additionally, Aisha continued to spend, holidays. She still stayed there when we were on the road. And it didn't dawn on me that she was suffering tremendously, emotionally, psychologically, because the way we were handling him, it appeared as if everything was normal. We never told the family, we never called him out. So, and it wasn't, I didn't come to grips with this until 38 years later. To me, I don't understand it, and I'm shocked at myself. So this situation within families, it's very difficult. And, growing up, I was raised primarily by my grandmother, and I had an aunt whom I loved dearly, and I loved my grandmother dearly. And they had such a horrible relationship, and I couldn't understand it, and I was almost an adult before my aunt told me that she had been molested, repeatedly as a child by her stepdad. And she felt that her mother, my grandmother, had not done anything about it. And their relationship, even though I knew they loved each other, but it was horrible. And so, I can't believe I repeated that. So for families, the first thing is you have to believe your child. And you have to take them out of that situation, no matter how difficult. And to this day, I think about how we should have handled it differently. And it's very sobering, very.
Yeah. So that was actually kind of in relation to my follow-up questions. In return to taking your child out of that space, how did you move forward with providing a safe space?
I didn't. That's what I'm saying. That's the whole point. She was never taken out of the space. This is, what I'm saying. And so, Christmas, Thanksgiving, Easter, all the holidays were spent there. And she continued staying there when I was on the road and her father couldn't take care of her, or he was we were both away, because we thought the actual molestation had stopped, and we were not dealing with the long-term consequences of Aisha not knowing when this could happen again, seeing us treat her grandfather as if he was still the upstanding man that we thought he was, and what that was doing to her. So this is the thing.
I just want to jump in and say that, you know, I'm 52, and this happened when I was 10. So this happened in 1979, from 79 or so to 81. And I share that because I think it's, you know, there's so many, one thing that I've learned growing in my journey called life is that there are multiple perspectives to a story, not me, or an experience, not a story, like we're telling a story in that way. And for me, it's, I just, and I walk gingerly, I want to say that I really didn't ever think that my parents believed me until I became an adult, until I talked about it. So I just want to also just kind of flesh it out. And while Pop Pop stopped after 2 years, there was no announcement. So I didn't know it stopped. It's only when I look back that I can go, it stopped. But it stopped, but I never knew. So I never knew if he was going to come in the room, if he was going to do, and I, you know, out of respect for survivors, I won't go into any of the details, but I never knew what could have happened. So there was always basically a fear,
Yeah.
of the dark. You know, when I think about Take Back the Night, like that, you know, marches and stuff, that's what it was. Cause I remember a time not being afraid of the dark, but I just never knew. And I just want to, you know, just in terms of talking about that healing and the complexity of that work.
So as a child, how did you really navigate that space, and knowing that your parents didn't believe you and knowing that you weren't in this safe space? What did you do growing up, or going through these years, knowing that you experienced this, knowing that this person is not being taken from being around you? How did you continue to move forward? Even if you did, how did you
Mhm.
kind of just go
It,
through those things?
it's very it's complicated, and you know, and this is hindsight looking back. So what I know is that, you know, it didn't happen all the time, like even while it was going on, let's say for that 2 years, it wasn't like a continuous thing. And I loved my grandfather. I loved my grandmother. I mean, their home was my second home, was, or third home if we're considering both my parents being home, having homes, and that it was home. So I loved those places. Um, I think because I didn't experience being believed as a child, I started wondering, is it really happening? I definitely in terms started lying. I think that looking back on it, I was a liar in my adolescent years in many ways. And so because that was a coping thing, and something that, you know, we're taught is, as survivors, is we're taught to lie, because if nothing is happening to take us out, we gotta lie to survive. Um, Food became a big comfort for me. Um, and friends, though I didn't tell anyone. I didn't, other than I told my mom, and I think after my mom told my dad, from my memory, and then I remember having a conversation or such with my dad, but it wasn't something that I shared with my friends. So none of my friends knew. So there was just kind of like this trying to cope. And my grandmother was one of my closest confidants, and there wasn't anything that I couldn't talk to her about, um, except for that. And that was a huge secret that I kept from her, and didn't tell her until she was on basically the last 3 days of her life, when I don't even know if she was conscious. And I want to like just kind of also flesh this out some more and say that my grandmother developed Alzheimer's when I, like, I guess when I turned 19 or so. And for the last 10 years of her life, when my grandfather had retired from work, and when they were going to enjoy their retirement years, he took care of her selflessly. I mean, he was the predominant and primary caretaker, with, you know, me and my dad like being like distant backup support. So I share that because it's like we want to make people who cause harm monsters, you know, and without question, he terrorized me. That was sexual terrorism. So I want to be really clear.
Mhm.
And he was the same person who terrorized me took care of his wife selflessly for 10 years. So she never set foot in a nursing home. So how do we hold all of those complexities? And I'm asking that for myself as a survivor. I don't I don't advocate. I think the survivors have to first focus on their healing and getting well, first and foremost. They don't need to be thinking about the harm doers and this and that. I'm not saying that. But for myself, I'm really thinking about, how do I hold that? Or how do I hold my parents not protecting me, and all the amazing things they did do as parents, and their incredible service in terms of their activism and putting their lives on the line for freedom and justice, not only in this country and globally. How do we hold all of this? Because we really want, this person's bad, that person's good. And
Right.
that's not the way it is.
So I have a quick question for you, because I know that you came forward about what you experienced as a child at a young age. And for me, I experienced sexual violence from the ages of 12 to 17, and I didn't come forward to my parents until I was in my mid 20s, so 24, 25. So I'm curious to know, how did you get the courage as a child to actually name that and talk about that? Because for me, I don't think I could ever have that type of strength to have that conversation with my parents.
You know, and getting back to the complexities, I think that was a testament to how I was raised by both my parents and, you know, and my grandparents. You know, my grandmother used to say, my father's mother used to say, there's no such thing as can't. I mean, as I said, I'm 52. So being named Aisha Shahida Simmons in the early 70s was not easy, was not cute. It was not popular. I was raised vegan. There were no Trader Joe's, Whole Foods, no Silk. You know, mother was making soy milk from scratch. I was raised Sufi Muslim, grew up in a Sufi Muslim community that my mother co-founded. So I share that to say that I was always, to use Audre Lorde's words, and I encountered her decades later, sister outsider. But all, grew up practicing Kwanzaa, speaking, Black is beautiful. We advocate for ourselves. We speak up for our rights, all of that. So in this space, I was empowered. I was raised to speak up and speak out against injustice. So that's the complexities and the contradictions. And so with that, I found my voice to say, this is happening to me. So that's how I would say that I was, and not just me, it was just, there's a whole generation of us, and particularly those, civil rights, Black power babies, where, we were encouraged and taught that we have to speak up for ourselves. We have to advocate for ourselves. So that's where it comes from.
Absolutely. Do you have anything to add, Dr. Simmons?
Well, I'm very, very glad that Aisha is showing all of these complexities, because, as she's just described, the way in which she was raised, and she never backed up, when I said, oh, no way, Pop wouldn't do anything like that. She said, yes, he is. Yes, he is. So, and I did not know, I may be, certainly we've had so many conversations. I did learn that Aisha did not know that I believed her, but hey, Anne was able to convince her father. But the fact that we were just wringing our hands and not doing anything, again, we can't tell her mother, his mother, it'll kill her, that kind of thing. Both of us needing for Aisha to have a quote unquote safe home when we were traveling and doing all of our work in the world. And never, ever calling him out personally. I can speak for myself. I did not.
Why do you think that you held back from calling him out face to face or just personally?
Well, I'm gonna tell you, that's something that I'm still trying to understand, because I certainly speak out on everything. So why on earth did I not step to him? I do not know. And it's very, very troubling.
So what do you think is unique about the intersection of sexual violence when it comes to the Black family, and how do you disrupt that?
For me, I think, sexual violence, it's really important that, and I know just in terms of just sharing, this is a global pandemic. And one of the things that I and others, not like be myself, is like, when we were in the height of COVID and, we were talking about sheltering in place, it really just hit me, children are always sheltering in place. So no COVID, we're sheltering in place. As you just shared, Michaela, about your experiences. I just shared, where are we going? It's not like I can like pack up and go somewhere as a child. And so I just want to share that. And then I think, as in the United States, and I would offer the Americas and Europe, but we're just talking about the United States. White supremacy is foundational to
Right.
the making of this country, and from the genocide, the theft of land of indigenous folks, and the enslavement of African people, and forced migration of Asians. I mean, it's on and on. And so, in order for us as a people to survive, we have had to rely on each other, our community, right? And it's been the battle against the continuous, as we know, all that we're constantly reminded against virulent white supremacy that is often state sanctioned in the context of, like, from police killings, what happens in trials, all, in all of that. And so then to talk about sexual violence in the family of origins, let alone the community, but to talk about sexual violence in the family when you're already under siege, where where do you turn? Where do you go? I mean, let me be very clear, I am an abolitionist, but even if I were, who's calling the police right now? You know what I'm saying? Like,
Absolutely.
so it's just kind of like, or if you got to survive in terms of, like, this person is the breadwinner, or as in my family's case, my grandparents provided the quote unquote safe home while my parents were out on the road. Then who was going to take care of Aisha? So I think that there are all these questions, and also the layers and generations of secrecy. Like my mother was talking about her aunt, my great aunt. I wonder what life could have been like if we had been talking about what happened to my aunt Jessie Hudson, like what happened to her. Perhaps that could have prevented what happened to me. So
Right.
there's also the layers of secrecy. And for Aunt Jessie, who was born in the early 20s, we're talking about Jim Crow, virulent, racist, apartheid South, because my mother is from Memphis, Tennessee, still going on now. So I think that plays, that white supremacy is integral to why there's so much silence in the complexities around disrupting it. We can't allow that, however, to be the reason why we don't disrupt it. But I do think it is the primary reason, which is why earlier I was saying we've got to look at all of these complexities. And that doesn't mean, and when we do it, we have to do it when we're centering the most immediate survivors, making sure that they are safe. But we cannot not talk about it, because
Right.
it's literally damaging lives, and then which impacts generations.
Absolutely. Definitely with generational trauma, we see that when things go unsaid, when things go untalked about, it keeps happening, and it keeps getting bigger and bigger and deeper. And that's not how we will stop sexual violence. That's not how things will get better if we're not addressing these issues, we're not educating communities, and we're not providing resources and support when it comes to survivors, and also making the community better.
Yeah. Did you want to say something, Mom? Did you?
Well, I was thinking of your maternal grandmother, and what she went through. I mean, and took it to her grave, even when things leaked out, she would never admit it. And her thing was, I'm not going to talk about it, and I don't want you to. So, she went through a lot, and it was also you know, her mother and father dying and going to live with an aunt and having a step uncle, you know, who also molested her and the other girls, you know. So this stuff is so deep. It's so deep, and it's generational, as you all have said. And the suffering and the secrets kept have gone on. And I am, you know, I'm almost speechless that I too participated in the silencing and the keeping the silence.
So how do we repair and how do we restore? Because we know it takes time. So what intentional steps did you take as an individual and as a family to get to this point in your relationship? And also for Aisha, can you tell us more about your book, Love with Accountability, and how this supported your individual and collective healing?
Yes, thank you. So in my film, No, the Rape documentary, both my parents are prominently featured in the film. My mother actually talks about a sexual assault that she experienced during the Mississippi Freedom Summer, or the orientation for it. And my father, who does a lot of international human rights work around violence against women, he is prominently featured. So I made this film, and this leads to Love with Accountability. Celebrating, I mean, they are heroes in the film, and they are heroes for the work that they did and do. But I did not really touch on childhood sexual abuse, and definitely didn't touch my stuff at all. And so here I was like doing this anti-rape work as a cultural worker, and not able, other than saying I am an incest survivor, to talk about what happened, to me. And it wasn't until when my grandfather became very ill, I played a role in, I'm not a medical professional, let me be very clear, but in saving his life and getting him to, along with one of my cousins, getting him to the hospital and really being by his side, until my father, who at the time was living out of the country, and my aunt, who was living in another state, could get there to be his advocates. But I was like by his side, and I want to say that if I had an opportunity to do it again, I would do it again. So, but once they came, I was like, no more. And I just, to my dad, I never really engaged with my aunt about this. And then he was like, okay. And so I didn't even go to my grandfather's funeral, any of that. So that began like chipping away at me trying to unpack the abuse, because it was clear about what Pop did, but I was also very frustrated, struggling with my parents and not knowing. And that was 2010, 2011. But it wasn't until 2015 when it just came to me. I mean, I think around, and I wouldn't say that I used the language bystander, but that my parents' roles in the harm that I experienced. And initially they were very reticent and resistant to talking about it. And I am a long-term Buddhist practitioner and meditator, and also, as I said, I was in therapy with Dr. Clara Whaley Perkins, and really trying to deal with the fact that my parents, these incredible human rights activists, were not able to engage with me. And I started signing my communiques, emails, texts, Love with Accountability. So I was just kind of like, we need to talk about this. And I just started signing it. And that came literally out of my meditative practice. I was sitting on my cushion, meaning meditating. And it just came. It was just like, it's not just about love. We need accountability to accompany the love, because so often with survivors of childhood sexual abuse, love is used as a weapon, in terms of, if you love us, you wouldn't talk about it. Why do you keep bringing this up? And so it was just like, yes, I love you all, but with accountability. So that started the work. And that was in 2015. And it wasn't until I think 2016 when my mom really came, there's a series of events, not enough time to get into all that, that led to her coming to grips with how she nor my dad, but just in terms of her, how she did not protect me. So that is what that is where love with accountability is, like my experiences. It's coming out of my lived experiences. And then that work, our family experience turned into a project, which led to an online forum of writings by diasporic Black survivors of childhood sexual abuse, about 26 survivors. And then the anthology, which came out in 2019, Love with Accountability, which includes writings by 40 diasporic Black survivors and advocates of child sexual abuse. And so that, and my invitation was for people to share their stories, that was important. I think it's very important for us to share our stories, but then also to write about how can we disrupt and end this inhumane pandemic humanely. And when I say diasporic, in terms of really including Black Indigenous folks, Black Latinx folks from the Caribbean, from the continent. So really including those voices. And my mother wrote about how she did not protect me. So I think that was such a gift, because it's one thing to do the private work, and that's critical, but for her willingness to be public about her role in allowing the child sexual abuse to occur.
One thing about love with accountability and accountability in general is that we know accountability has to be voluntary, and it requires consent, and that individual has to arrive at that place or at that moment. So my question for you, Dr. Sims, is how did you arrive to that place where you wanted to hold yourself accountable for not protecting your daughter in that moment?
And as you have heard, we're talking long years, right. So it's not even a moment. I was in Aisha's apartment, and she and her father and I were talking, and as we were finally, as a threesome, addressing what had happened to Aisha, and for some reason, it was almost like scales falling off your eyes. I mean, I got it. It was a jolt. It was very, very painful to understand, as she now calls it, and I guess others call it, the bystander role. Post the 2 years of her being sexually molested, but the years after that, mm-hmm. I don't know why that I didn't get it. So, when I did, it was so painful. It was so painful because I finally was beginning to understand the years of our difficult relationship. Because, for many years, I just couldn't understand why Aisha couldn't forgive me, because I had truncated it to those 2 years and not the years after, and never, ever calling him to account. So clearly, Aisha's prodding and writing and signing all of her emails and communiques as Love with Accountability, I finally got it. I mean, I had not been accountable. I had not been. And it was a painful, painful recognition of my bystander role.
And I just want to jump in. I also want to, particularly as we enter into, Father's Day coming on Sunday, that it took my dad longer than my mother, and his voice is not in this conversation. His voice is not in the anthology. and last spring 2020. So um, my mother and I did a Zoom conversation because we were all sheltering in place in our respective spaces. And so my mother referenced the first conversation that happened in 2015 or 2016, where for her the scale where the three of us talked, because as I said, they've been divorced, separated since I was 4. Now they are friends and comrades and have been through the years, particularly after I became an adult, because it was not a custody issue at all. But in terms of the three of us talking about this issue, I think I can count my hands, my fingers, and have fingers still on one hand. But that one conversation in 2016, and then we had another one last year on Zoom, and it was for me another very powerful conversation because my father got it as well. I mean, so that it was, and I think that there was something very powerful about all three of us being in the space, because it's like, as I said, there are many sides to this story and there are many witnesses. I mean, I'm key witness. My body is evidence, but I just, in terms of like what happened and how did it happen, and this is something that happened in 1979, and at that time my father's brother was dying from Agent Orange poisoning. So it's so complex, but I want to just say that it was, for me, really powerful. And for him, him sharing, I finally understand. And I think for all, I'm not a parent and I won't be in this lifetime, but I think there are a lot, I think that it must be, I can't even imagine how hard it must be, to come face to face with not protecting your child, because that is the one thing that parents are charged with. And then I would offer, I mean, I think in all families, regardless of what you do in your life and all of that. Then I think, and I would let my mother speak for herself. My dad's not here to speak. I think there's got to be another layer, right? These are people who have put their lives on the line. My mother's been in jail. My father was in prison for 30 months for refusing to fight in Vietnam. I mean, just protests and, union organizing, not only in this country, but around the world. And so to come face to face with, like, this is how I have dedicated my life, and then I did not protect my child, that I'm sure all kinds of walls and, barriers come up to kind of excuse, justify, or try to shut it down. I don't say that to excuse or condone it. I just say that we won't be able to disrupt that if we don't look at all of these complexities.
Absolutely. Dr. Cindy, do you have something to add?
Well, it's, when trying to think about disrupting this, clearly it needs to be bigger than one family at a time. We'll never get where we're trying to go. And this is a very serious problem. And I'm pleased that organizations like yours and the work that Aisha is doing is addressing this. We have to talk about it in the churches. We have to talk about it in all of our various organizations. I mean, we really have, this needs to be a big push.
Right.
And in the Black church, we know how many young girls are molested by the upstanding deacons and preachers and others.
And boys.
And boys. That's, oh yes, absolutely. Thank you. So I think, we have to do a full court press in our schools, in our sororities, fraternities, all of our clubs. We have got to start talking about this and finding ways to disrupt this. My daughter is an abolitionist. I'm not quite there with her on this because, at some points I think and I clearly am anti-police. So I don't know what we do in terms of, as she said, who do you call, and possibly in every organization and church group and all of that, we have to have people who are trained and dedicated to disrupting this. This has got to be a major push, just as we, have the Black Lives Matter, we're trying to stop police violence. We have got to stop this violence in the homes.
Right.
And so it has to become a major issue for us as Black people across this nation.
And I just want to say it's churches, and as you know, Mom, as a Muslim and Islamic scholar, mosques, temples, it's everywhere, that we, and I think that it is, I'm thinking about my healing journey, right? In terms of, I can't imagine where I would be without a spiritual practice, without therapy, and then without, equally as important, without community. Like, I am in community with incredible BIPOC, as in Black, Indigenous, people of color, as well as anti-racist white folks who are working to disrupt and end this pandemic. I was fortunate to be in a 4-year fellowship called the Just Beginnings Collaborative Fellowship that was predominantly people of color, survivors, childhood sexual abuse survivors, who were doing incredible work to disrupt sexual violence in the home. And I share this because I think it's really important. I'm honored and grateful to be here to share this platform with my mom, and also to just kind of bring in the voices, the energies of so many people who are doing this work contemporarily, but who did it before me, who will do it after me. That we're on a long distance marathon run for co-creating a world without violence. And for me, when I think about the anthology Love with Accountability, in terms of that collective, that chorus of voices of male survivors, of women survivors, of gender queer survivors, trans survivors, really talking about their experiences and their visions for how we can disrupt and end this. Because and I think that what's really important is, I want it to end right now, yesterday. I want to be really clear. And I want us, in the words of Audre Lorde, we have to be deliberate and intentional. We can't come up with quick fixes. Yes, the goal is to get the immediate victim survivor out of the situation, but we got to think about long term, so that there will one day be a generation who will say, wow, people used to do that. Right. Like, that's when I think about the work, I'm thinking, like, in the tradition of the Iroquois nation, like, what am I doing that is going to have an impact 7 generations from now?
And this is why I love these spaces and I love these conversations. And this is what I mean by open and being honest and transparent. And just to piggyback off what you said earlier, I don't know where I would be without therapy, and I don't know where I would be without community. Just to have that person that can help me on this healing journey and take these steps to be better. Ever since I started therapy personally, this is like the first time in my life where I woke up and chose life. Like, I woke up and chose some sort of happiness, like there was something worth living for. And just being around a community that holds you, because community doesn't always have to be your blood relatives and your family. This can be your organizing spaces as well. So just having that community where I can talk to them, where they can give me resources, where they can give me support, and just having those people that share those experiences with you and help build with you and help you on this journey as well, I think is extremely important. And it's just, it definitely takes time. It definitely takes time for a lot of survivors. Healing is not linear. This is a journey. Some days are good, some days are bad. It's definitely a process, but I'm just thankful for therapy, for community, for just getting me through this process, because I personally, like you said earlier, I don't know where I would be without them.
Yeah. I started therapy in 1992. From 92 to last year, and probably will go back, but 27 years of work with Dr. Clara Raley Perkins. And then in terms of my meditation practice, Vipassana meditation practice, I started in 2002 and I'm still doing it. So 19 years. So that And I still can get triggered. I still can, be upset and hurt. And I mean, I think what therapy and meditation and community has helped me to do grounding, find, have resources, grounding resources, like how Shashina opened up our space today. I mean, and being in Dharma communities, just really finding those tools and resources. So, because it's not, for me, about not ever being triggered again. It's about hopefully not spiraling down and out, like to recognize, oh, I'm feeling something here. Yeah.
Definitely how you respond to those triggers and how you
Exactly.
when you experience that.
Exactly.
So our families are our first teachers, our first guides on how to love, how to deal with big emotions, and how to navigate pain amongst others. What have your experiences taught you about your family? Question for both of you.
Yeah. I think for me, my experiences have taught me is that we are filled with contradictions, that we are complex human beings filled with contradictions, and it's not all good or all bad. It is. And it hasn't been easy. I mean, I would say last year we finally kind of got some kind of a clearing. It was rough for a while around this love with accountability. It's just been rough, but I've seen the healing power of accountability, and I'm grateful. My parents are, elders, and I'm grateful that we've been able to do this hard work while we're all here. And sometimes I recognize that there are many people who can't. They have to do it, just kind of ancestral healing, or can't even do it while families are here. But I think for me, the power of accountability, the power of recognizing that, no one is without causing harm, and that we're all flawed. There's a spectrum of harm, but we're all flawed and complex and contradictory folks. And that doesn't mean, for me, that I want to withhold love as a result of that.
Well, as I mentioned, my aunt, Jessie Hudson, and my mother, Juanita Watson, both of whom suffered, and there was no reconciliation for them. And I can remember having grown up with my grandmother, and of course my aunt would come from Chicago to visit, and everything would start out beautifully, and then before the 2 weeks were up, it had just almost become hell. I mean, and I knew that I did not want to have that kind of relationship with Aisha. And once I found out, about the sexual molestation of my Aunt Jessie by her stepfather, and, the years of my grandmother not intervening, she did finally leave. And, as Aisha has mentioned, things are very difficult, because in those years, it was dire when my grandmother did get the courage to take her 2 children and leave, and basically having to sleep on the floor in a sister's house. So this is heavy stuff. So anyway, I knew that I wanted the healing to occur between Aisha and me, so that we could have the kind of relationship that I knew I wanted, and I knew she also wanted. So this process that we have been going through over the last few years has really, from my perspective, been a healing and bringing us together in a way that I'm so grateful for, because as Black people who are beset with, racism and all kinds of problems. Our families are just so important, and we must heal and keep our families together. And, for so long, women have suffered to keep Black families together by silencing the abuse, the rape and physical abuse and all of that we have swallowed and accepted to try and keep the Black family together, and certainly our children also. So we must heal if we are going to remain as a viable Black community.
So that actually goes into our next question about what is your vision for healthy Black families? What does that look like moving forward? And what resources exist to support us in moving forward in having this vision if we want Black communities to get better, if we want Black families to have these conversations around sexual violence and protect their children? What does that look like moving forward?
Well, I think what's really important, and I speak as a Black queer, Black lesbian woman, that we have to really expand the definition of family, because families look and families come in all shapes and sizes. And so I think that that's really important, that we recognize that there isn't one family. It's kind of unit in terms of, so I think that that's really key. And I think that we cannot talk about disrupting violence in the Black community or any communities without talking about disrupting patriarchy. And in terms in talking about in patriarchy doesn't only, you can be in a patriarchal situation where there isn't a man present. Yep. So, it's not, so I'm talking about a system like white supremacy. And so I think that, so in terms of that healthy family, we have to really unpack patriarchy and recognize that so many of our religions and spiritual practices reinforce patriarchy. So we're getting it, in many directions, and it's not just one religion, there are many of them. And so that is also part of the teaching, the grounding that informs our societies and culture. So I think that's really key. That I think that we have to, I would like for folks to really begin to see accountability as love and not as punishment. And I think that part of my many reasons why I'm an abolitionist is that I think that part of the reason why so many people stay silent is the fear of other people knowing our business, but also the state getting involved. And we know and not just police, but foster care. I mean, there's just been since 1619, there's just been disruption of Black communities, state sanctioned white supremacist disruption. So I wonder, and there are several folks in the anthology I'm thinking about, Ferenc Lafargue, who writes about this in terms of like, if we remove the state, if we could just for a second remove the state from the equation and start thinking about how, then how we can disrupt it, would people be willing to talk about it more? And that doesn't mean letting people off the hook, letting the harm doers roam around molesting generations upon generations. I do not mean that at all. But could there be a space where then therefore we're not silencing the child who's saying this is happening because we're so afraid of what's going to happen to that person, where we can really center and say, we are going to protect you. And we believe you, even if you have questions, even if you're not sure, to tell that child that you believe them. And then you can go figure out what's going on. But you let that child know that they are believed, so that they are not constantly doubting or in their own terror of feeling unprotected and then being victimized again and again.
I think that's very important, to letting the child know, I believe you. I think that's the first step. When someone comes forward to you about an experience of sexual violence, just the I believe you. That's affirming what they've experienced, and then taking the steps to say, hey, what do you need? What I can do? How can I make this space safer for you? And also going back to what you said about patriarchy and white supremacy, not just only that, but transphobia, homophobia,
Yes.
ableism, sexism. We have all these systems that contribute to sexual violence. Because a lot of times people think sexual assault is just about sex, and it's not. It's about power. So we have all these systems of oppression that kind of contribute to that power. So definitely echoing what you said. I definitely agree with you.
And I just want to, you know, the other thing, and I credit my friend and comrade Ignacio Hutia Shaiti Rivera, who and they write about this in the anthology, but they really talk about the need to have comprehensive sex education from the cradle to the grave. There's this notion of let's not talk about sex because
Right.
that's going to protect the children, and yet sex is such an integral part of sexual violence. Yes, it's violence and it is power, but it's part, and we have to, the way in which we protect children is by educating them and talking about it with them, including that sex is pleasurable or should be pleasurable. That doesn't mean we're going to tell a 5-year-old child to have sex, but we have to create spaces for that. And then also in terms of the you know, exorbitant amounts of violence that are happening to genderqueer and trans children. My another comrade and friend, Amita Swadine and Jaden Fields, or the Mirror Memoirs Project, where they're focusing on queer, BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color survivors, childhood sexual abuse survivors, because studies have shown that yes, girls, cisgender girls and boys definitely are prone to being abused, but so are genderqueer children. And so often parents are trying to, you know, police the kid's gender without really making sure that the child is safe from sexual harm.
I think when a lot of people hear the word sex education, as you said, they automatically go to sex without thinking, okay, we're discussing boundaries, we're discussing body parts. And also, unfortunately, children are not exempt from experiencing sexual violence. So why do you not want them to have that conversation about boundaries and making sure that they're okay? They should be open to that conversation.
And if they don't want to sit on Santa Claus's lap, if they don't want to kiss auntie or uncle, don't make them. If they don't, you know, don't be like, I got to get this picture of you and say, no, if they're crying, don't let them do that. Don't make them kiss so-and-so, because we're teaching them to do something against their will.
Exactly. And we're teaching them that their boundaries don't matter.
Exactly.
Dr. Simmons?
Yes.
I have a question for you in the chat.
Oh, okay.
Can you please talk about how your own sexual assault experience shaped how you handled your daughter's sexual assault?
Well, you know, I thank you for the question. In the case of, you know, my own sexual assault, as I mentioned, it happened the first, you know, I've had several, but in college and then while I was in the civil rights movement, I certainly did tell, but nothing was, you know, done about it. In the case of during the civil rights era, particularly the time I was assaulted at the orientation session when we were preparing to go to Mississippi in 1964 for Mississippi Freedom Summer, I did tell the people who were the heads, and you know, they said, we don't have time for this. You know, it's like we're getting ready to go down here and these people are going to be trying to kill us, and you know, we're trying to get you all ready to face that. We cannot deal with this. And you know, to make matters worse, it was like, I don't know what you're making such a fuss about, you know. So I don't know if what happened to me had an impact on my not speaking out to Aisha's molester, telling the family. It seems as I'm examining it, and I do it regularly, there were 2 or 3 things. One, her grandmother being concerned about her, also, very importantly, where would Aisha stay if we closed that door? And the whole issue of the jobs, mine and her dad's, that required the travel. And so, you know, there was selfishness here, being concerned about my own job, my own work. And it's really very painful to be able to look at that and admit it. But that seemingly, those two things played this major role. As Aisha has mentioned, her grandmother had this illness, so she couldn't work. She required very skilled health care, and all of that, of course, was paid for by her husband's very good insurance. So, you know, when Aisha's dad and I would talk about it, his thing was, you know, what can we do? Rebecca, you know, she can't leave Pop-Pop. So, you know, this is impossible. So these are the complexities that Aisha has already laid out. And I know people will have to deal with these complexities and problems. But as has been said, what we did not do is what every parent should do. And that is to put the welfare of the child first. And we didn't do it.
Going back to Freedom Summer, how did you kind of navigate that space when you had this experience with sexual violence and then having to go advocate for voting rights, advocate for desegregation? Like, how did you kind of work through that, having to go organize when you just experienced something so traumatic?
Well, what I did, you know, when I was at the orientation, I was being trained to be the director of the Freedom School in that particular city. But as it turned out, I became the project director because the male project director was arrested and was run out of the state. And so I was left to become the project director. And what I did was to come up with the policy. And that is, there will be no sexual harassment on this project, or you will be thrown off this project. And so every man had to sign a statement saying that he understood that. So that was how I dealt with what had happened to me. And I also saw it happening to others during the orientation.
And I just want to say, you know, this was 1964, so we're not talking about, and she was 19 turning 20, you know, like that's just, it's still very profound to me. And, you know, we're uncovering the histories of, you know, of the work, the profound work of Rosa Parks and others, but at that time it wasn't known. So to be able to do that in the height of Jim Crow apartheid Mississippi, to be really clear, I think is just very powerful and heroic. And that's what I talk about. And when you were asking about what have I learned from the family, that it's just, it's like, it's a collage. It's a collage of so many stories of, you know, of power, of triumph, of pain, of trauma, of healing.
Let me just add that, you know, I went there to be there for the summer and wound up being there for 18 months. And during the summer, most of the volunteers who had come to work were white young people. And so when they left, it left 3 of us there. And I basically could not get guys to come and work on the project. It was called the Amazon Project. And so, you know, I was, you know, castigated for having the nerve to say there was not going to be any sexual harassment. And if you did it, you were going to be put out. So, you know, there was pushback, big time.
And I hope that people, particularly in terms of those contemporary movement leaders, organizers, activists who are doing incredible work on behalf of communities and who are parents that, you know, and I say we, even though I'm not a parent, that we, you know, that we also, we humble ourselves and recognize that we, even in the face of heroic acts and doing transformational work, we still can cause harm, and a lot of times harm our children. And so that when that is brought to our attention, that we are accountable for that. I think that that's really key.
I agree.
So we have time for one more question, and I'm interested in knowing both of your thoughts. I watched your rape documentary, the film, No, the Rape documentary, and I came across this quote. I think it was towards the beginning of the film. It was a Black woman that was speaking, and there was kind of a little bit of a quote that she referenced. I'm paraphrasing. She said, "We can't do it in a way that still shows that we believe in a sense of community, but in a sense that community is founded on justice." So I wanted to know, what does justice when it comes to community look like for you all? And when I say
Okay.
justice, I mean outside of the prison industrial complex. Like, what does justice in terms of community look like when it comes to dismantling rape culture?
I just want to thank you for, I mean, I feel like that quote is from Dr. Aronette M. White, and who is now an ancestor. She died 9 years ago from an aneurysm. But it's just, whew, it's like, I was like, okay, Aronette is in the room. And was a scholar, activist, advisor to Know, the Rape documentary, and just so pivotal. For me, justice looks like accountability for not only the acts of sexual harm, but for the bystanders. Because I think that whether we're talking about childhood sexual abuse, adult sexual violence, so often there's a circle around the person who's caused harm. And for whatever reasons, people are not addressing it, either after the fact, during the fact, or even if they know that this person is a harm doer. So in terms of justice is, you know, really prioritizing the lives of the community and being clear, because so often justice is only framed under in the context of racial justice, and that is important. But as I always say, and other people say, but long before me, if racism ended right now, like just no more racism, and I'm sure we would all have a jig, a dance, we're still not safe. And so that we have to have intersectional approaches to all the forms of harm that enable sexual violence to flourish. And to me, justice is a commitment, and not only just theoretical, but an embodied commitment in our work, in our families, in our churches, in our mosques, in all of these spaces that we inhabit, to really work in terms of, hopefully we can or will be able to prevent it. But then if not, what do we do when it is brought to our attention? That we have to be willing, even if it's our best friend, our lover, our parent who's being accused, that we have to be willing to the possibility that this happened, and be willing to address it without necessarily throwing that person away, definitely getting them away from the person who has been harmed, and making sure that that person is safe and cared for, but that we make it clear that there is no greater issue than invasion of our bodies against our will.
Well, I certainly agree with this. And, you know, being an organizer from my earliest years, and still trying to organize into my 7th decade here, I think, and I'm so happy about the Me Too movement and all the other movements that are working on this, because we have to be organized and intentional to address this. And it certainly it requires education around the issue, bringing it out of the shadows and being very clear that this is happening, this is harming children, and basically can destroy their lives. So I think that while we're clearly must address racism, classism, and all the other horrific oppressions that beset us, this has to become another major issue that we address in our organizing work, because we have to address it. We have to educate people, and it means certainly taking on patriarchy and taking on interpersonal violence. I mean, we need training in our communities, settings, to really educate people about this, because it's not something that I think a lot of people are really educated about, aware of. And this is something we have to do. And I'm happy that the Me Too movement is doing it.
Yes, I think that's very important, that we have to address this issue. We have to be honest about what's going on in our families and our communities and our homes. We have to want to educate ourselves. We have to want to hold ourselves accountable to the violence that we perpetuate as well. And also educate our community, providing resources and making sure that we're showing up for one another, because the only way we can eradicate rape culture is first if we have to address it as it is.
Exactly.
So I just want to thank you both, Aisha and Dr. Simmons, for your words and for your wisdom, your expertise in this space. I'm all about giving Black women their flowers. So I just thank you. I thank you for just giving us great insight. Thank you for having the courage to share your stories and just being authentic in the space. And thank you to our survivor healing community for joining us today to listen to these two dynamic, amazing speakers. Be sure to check out Aisha's book, Love with Accountability, and also Know the Rape documentary. I'm pretty sure they threw the resources in the chat and direct links, so make sure you check both of those out. Also, thank you to the Metropolitan Interpreting Services team for ASL interpretation, Letty Fox for live captioning support, Melina and Claudio for Spanish interpretation, Iram and Irisha for healing chat support. Be sure to tune in next week on the 23rd for a conversation on disrupting amongst youth. Thank you all so much for this conversation. And thank you again to our speakers, and have an amazing night.
Thank you, Vinkela, for your amazing moderation. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you for language justice. Me too. Thank you.
Welcome magic and wonder, brilliance and grace. Welcome joy, satisfaction, pleasure and strain. Welcome essence, beauty, presence, time, spirit, form and space. Welcome excellence in every blessing, sacred and praise. What I seek, I have. What I wanna know, I understand. All I wish I could, I can. Who I wanna be, I am. What I seek, I have. What I wanna know, I understand. All I wish I could, I can. Who I wanna I am the flower, I am the bee. I am fire and I am wind. I accept love and also I give.